So in the last class we studied the object creation process. One important point we noticed is this part, the initialization part. It was not clear for us. And we saw that when we print the value of speed, it was printing zero point 0.0, and same does the value of speed for odd is also initialized with zero point 0.0, as they both are of type double. Now, in order to explain you the initialization part, that is the constructor part, let me take a brand new example. Here, let me create one class called employee. I already have it created here, and I will have some few members, data members, some properties for employee. What we can have? We can have int id, string name, then double salary, which rarely happens in the real world. So behavior, what behavior we can have for an employee? If you find a situation where for an illustration purpose or for any other means, if you are not able to come up with an behavior name, you can always give one standard behavior name, that is do something. This is the name most of the developers use to represent a standard behavior. You can have something like here, employee is doing something. Now I'll create one file called employee test.java, which I already have it here. What I want to do is, let me call it as employee test. I want to instantiate employee. So how do I do that? Obviously the same usual step I'll take, that is employee emp1 equal to, let's say, new employee. Then generally what do? I will initialize with id equal to some value, emp1 dot name equal to some value, Jack Sparrow, then emp1 dot salary equal to some value. So what salary would give him? Let's also print the contents of the employee1 details dot id name dot salary. Let's quickly compile this. Java C, there's an employee. See, if I keep the file name and class name same, now in the employee test, if I am compiling test class and where employee has been called, in this case what happens? If you simply compile employee test.java, so that file will be automatically compiled. So that is the advantage what you get by keeping the file name and class name same. And even by convention you should do the same actually. Employee test. Now you see here we are getting the output and what we wanted. Now let's take an example. Let's create one more employee object. Let's call it as employee2. I'll use the same way of doing employee2. This is as usual, like this part like what we created for a car. But now here in employee2, what I'll do, I will not initialize with any value, but I will just try to print it. So as you can guess, it will be initialized with the default value. So id is initialized with 0, name is initialized with null, and salary is initialized with 0.0. So why it is happening like that, and what is this? So there is no method as such as employee here, just like there was no method as such as car earlier. The reason is because in this case, this is basically called as a constructor. An implicit constructor is called. What is the role of implicit constructor? Implicit constructor role is to initialize the data members with default values, which is 0 for numeric type, false for boolean type, and /u0000 for character type, and null for, you might have guessed it as string. No, null for user defined data type. So String is basically a class. It is a user defined data type. That is why null has been initialized. If you have another user defined data type, say for example employee is a user defined data type, that we are defining a type here, employee, let's say emp. Now if you try to print emp1.emp, in that case we'll get the output as null again. So let's remove this. So you get the context. Now what if I am not happy with the default value initialized by the implicit default constructor? What if I am not happy with that? Then what I should do? I should explicitly create a constructor. So I will create one, my own constructor. Now here what I will do? I will initialize the data member with my own values. ID equal to, let's say -1. Name equal to, let's say not specified. Salary equal to, let's say -1. It's like giving back the salary to company. Now you see here, now if I compile and execute, what happens? You see this time the explicit constructor is called. This time explicit constructor is called, where we are initializing our own default values. Now if I compile and execute same program, I get a my own values, user defined values we can call it. What we can call it as? We can call it as user defined values. So is it clear? Now understand this here. So let's add some comments here. In this case, what is happening? Explicit constructor is called. Why? Because employee class now do contain a constructor with the signature employee. So if I want to initialize my own default values, I would go for an explicit constructor. Now after creating an object, what do we do next? We initialize, isn't it? What is a constructor? As you can see here, it is a method. It is nothing but a method. So what is the difference? So let me explain it to you. A constructor is a special method whose name is same name as class name, but it does not contain return type. Not even void should be specified. No void at all. If you make void here, then it becomes ordinary method. It is no more can be called as a constructor. So can we create a method with the same name as class name? Yes, possible. If you have a return type, then it is not constructor. So let me repeat again. A constructor is a special method whose name is same name as class name, which does not return any value. The purpose of the constructor is to initialize the data members. Suppose if you don't have a constructor at all, then we can say default constructor or implicit constructor is in action. It will initialize with the default values which I told you earlier. Suppose if we create an explicit constructor, then whatever the values we assigned here, that get initialized here. Is it clear? Now know this one. Since constructor is a method, why don't we just pass this as an what? Arguments. So let me create one third employee object. So in this case, what is happening now? Just now I created an third object of the employee class. I instantiated for the third time. In this case, what is happening? Let's say I will pass some value here, and I will pass some value here, and something else here to represent an different employee altogether. Now, since constructor is a method, yes, obviously I can send them as parameter. It's a special method with no return type, but we can send arguments. So what will happen now? It will go and check in the employee class. Is there is a constructor which accepts 3 arguments? We don't have anything here. So what we can do? Let's create one brand new constructor which accepts 3 arguments. So here I have a parameterized constructor which accepts ID, name, salary. Basically it accepts a value of int, second argument is of type string, third argument is of type double. But now here I have like this. If I say ID equal to ID, what I want, whatever the ID is coming here, that is triple one, I want to assign it to this guy. So it will come as an input to this guy. So whatever the value is coming as an input here, that I want to assign it to the data member ID, the property of the employee. So this is a local variable. So if I say ID equal to ID, we are saying local variable ID equal to local variable ID. So this would be wrong. All I want is I want to identify this guy. But this time we did like this. So it is alright. Now here you have to understand this. If I want to refer to the ID of the current object, then I will use something called this pointer. So what is this pointer? This pointer is a reference to the current object. That means, let me explain it more clearly. This is very important. You have to understand this. In this line, we know that an object is getting created. Now I have a new keyword. What happens here? Instantiation happens. That means memory gets allocated for ID, name and salary. Now the constructor comes into action. So what should happen inside the constructor? Now the object is already created. Now within that object I want to access the members of the class. In that case I can go for this pointer. So this pointer refers to the current object. Now why do I need this here? Why do I don't need this here? Simple reason. If I simply say ID and there is no other variable called ID here, then it will always straight away point to the data members. Now there is an ambiguity here. There is also a variable called ID. Now I want to distinguish. In that case, if I say this dot ID, it points to the property. If I say simply ID, it points to the local variable. The problem would have been resolved if I say IDX, then I can say ID equal to IDX. Then there is no issue, because when I say ID here, it is pointing to this ID only. And here also, if I say this dot ID or ID, that doesn't make any difference. They both are pointing to the ID itself. But when do I exclusively need this pointer? When my variable names have an ambiguity. So why don't we just name it as IDX, name X, salary X then? Now you just think yourself, isn't it awkward? I want to keep the same name, but I want to identify it distinguishedly. So that is about this pointer. Again we'll study, there's one more thing called calling the constructor. Again we'll come to this pointer again. If the concept is not clear, I want you to rewind, go back and listen to my class, whatever I just explained it to you again. Suppose if you still cannot understand this, don't worry, give it a time, but blindly understand this one. When there is another variable with the same name as data member, to distinguish, I can make use of this pointer. That would be the most simplest explanation I could give. So now that we have done this, so let me compile and execute. So this is the third employee. The first employee, we assign the values. Second employee is calling the explicit constructor. And the third employee, we pass the values as arguments and we made use of parameterized constructor. Now one important thing you have to understand here, that is, I just now wrote these lines here, and so I want you to go and read them to make the concept clear. Very important, you have to understand this one. This guy, what we have here, employee. This is not a default constructor. This is a non-parameterized explicit constructor. It is not a default or implicit constructor. Many times people get confused. Default constructor is when there is no constructors at all. Now within this constructor, what happens? The first thing happens in any explicit constructor, maybe this or maybe this. The first thing which happens in any explicit constructor is initializing the data members with default values. Initializing the data members with default values. So that means these data members, ID, name and salary, when this constructor is called, let's say I go to employee test, I have this here, let's take employee 2. It's calling new employee. So what happens now? First it will check, is there any constructor in the employee class with the name employee with no parameter? Yes, there is. So within this, first thing which happens is JVM will initialize the data members, that is ID, name and salary, with their default values, which is 0, null, 0.0. After that, the remaining statements are executed. So we are reinitializing the id with -1, name with not specified, and salary with -1. Suppose if I remove salary, then if the explanation is true, then they are initialized with the default value. Since salary we are not initializing, which is been done already now, so that would be initialized with 0.0. Employee 2. This constructor is called. It comes here. First it initializes the all the data members with default value. After that, I choose to reinitialize only ID and name. So now if I compile my program and execute, then for the salary of employee 2, what is the output I should get? I should get the output as 0.0. Let's compile this. You see, employee 2 -1 I initialized, not specified, but employee 2 is getting the value as 0.0 for only one reason, that is because the first thing which happens in any explicit constructor is to initialize the data members with default values. So let me reinitialize this now. Salary equal to, let's say, -1. Now let's go ahead and create one more constructor. We already have two constructors here. See, remember the method overloading? We can overload the method with the same name, but difference is in the number of arguments, or type of arguments, or the order of arguments. Same way, if I wish to have one more constructor, I can do so. What is the necessity of that? Simple. Imagine when our APIs obviously will be used by other people. Suppose if somebody knows the ID and name but not the salary of the employee, but yet still they want to create the object of employee, then they should be able to do so. It's a int ID string name. Now again this dot ID equal to, I'll say ID this dot name equal to, let's say name whatever is coming as input. Using this constructor, I will go ahead and initialize. I will instantiate one more object. Let me call it as employee emp4 equal to new employee. This time I will pass 100 and the name as, let's say, Kate. Now if I display employee 4 information, 4.id, 4.name and 4.salary. So obviously for the ID I'll get the 100 and for name I'll get Kate, but for the salary what will happen? Remember my explanation? What is the first thing that happens in any constructor is to initialize the data member with default values. So for the salary output will be 0.0. So let me put one divider here so that we can have a clarity in interpreting the output. Kate 0.0. So 0.0 is okay because that is the first thing which happens, that is initializing the data members with default values. But I'm not happy with that one. I want my default value if it is not initialized, that is -1. So what shall I do? There are many things I can do. One is I can always say salary equal to -1 here. But I already written the code here for initializing my own default values. So what? Every time I create any other explicit constructor, I will call this non-parameterized constructor. So you know that on how to call a method, right? We call like this, isn't it? But when it comes to constructor, instead of using the name like this, you have to use this. This is the way to call the constructor which has been written here. So now what happens? Same program. Now we see the output as -1. So what happened in this case? When we created 100 and Kate went as an input to this. Now the first thing which happened here is initializing the data members with the default values, followed by my own values has been reinitialized, followed by I reinitialized ID and name with the input which is coming here. So since this guy has initialized the salary with -1, we see the output as -1. Okay, concept is clear. So again, this is another parameters constructor. We can say constructor overloading. So we have three constructors and with a different signature. Now here you see, let me add some comments here. So what happened first? ID is initialized with 0, name is initialized with null, salary is initialized with 0.0. What is happening in this line? Calling our explicit non-parameterized constructor. Remember this is not calling default constructor. ID is now reinitialized with my value what I am sending, getting as an input here. Name is now reinitialized. Salary is -1 as we called our non-parameterized constructor, where salary is initialized with -1, our user defined value. And suppose, let's take a situation. I called non-parameterized constructor is alright. What if I want to call this constructor? Suppose, or let's assume in this constructor I want to call this guy. Since he is initializing ID and name, but I'll just what? I want to initialize the salary information. So I can do like this. I'll say this ID name, I'll pass it to whatever input is coming here, I'll pass it to this constructor. What is that? The constructor with two parameters. So we are sending two values, and followed by I'm initializing my own values. So that is for the third parameter. So like this, in one constructor we can call another constructor. But one important thing you should be aware of. These are the questions will come in like what is the output of this program. Say for example, if they have written a program and statement is here, what is the output of this? In this case, we'll get a compile time error. Why? The simple reason, very important, listen to this. Calling the constructor in one constructor should be the first statement in any constructor. I repeat, calling a constructor in one or other constructor, the statement of calling should be the first statement. That's all about the constructors. Please look into the notes, note down the notes, and also complete the assignments whatever has been posted there, and our developers will verify it and will assign marks to those assignments.